What if I told you that for months, a group of gamblers had been taking millions from Las Vegas casinos without cheating illegally? It seems impossible, I know. Because when you think of Las Vegas, you think of the city that never loses, the world capital of gambling, a place built on statistics, probability, and absolute control. In Vegas, the house always wins. Always. At least that's what they want you to believe. Now imagine the scene. Silent VIP lounges, high-stakes Baccarat tables, executives circulating backstage, observing real-time reports. And amidst all this, a pattern begins to emerge. A player wins, then wins again, and again, and again. At first, nobody worries. After all, big bets generate big fluctuations. It's part of the game. But the winnings didn't stop. They weren't isolated bursts of luck. They were consistent results. Too precise. Too calculated. Have you ever experienced this? That feeling that something is wrong, but you still can't prove it? That's exactly how it started. Las Vegas casinos are no amateurs. They have advanced surveillance systems, hired statisticians, cameras at every possible angle. Every card dealt, every chip moved, every facial expression is observed. If someone were hacking the system, they would know. If it were armed robbery, it would show up on the cameras. If it were traditional cheating, security would intervene. But it wasn't anything like that. There was no digital intrusion. There were no rigged cards up their sleeves. There were no accomplices distracting the croupiers. What was happening was far more sophisticated and far more disconcerting. Internal reports began circulating among directors. Closed meetings were called. Names were carefully analyzed. Who were these players? Where did they come from? How could they maintain such exceptional performance in an environment where the odds always favored the casino? And the more they investigated, the more unsettling it became. Because what they found wasn't illegal, at least not in the traditional way. It was something that exploited an invisible loophole, hidden in plain sight. A detail so small that no one had considered it relevant, until it started costing millions of dollars. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. Las Vegas is driven by power, money, and control. Every game is designed to give the house a mathematical advantage. Every flashing light, every free drink, every patterned carpet has a psychological function. Nothing there is by chance. So how could anyone turn the tables on such a well-protected system? This is the part that left the executives in shock. It wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. And it definitely wasn't an ordinary scam. It was a secret system. A silent, patient, and incredibly intelligent method. Something that worked within the apparent rules, but dismantled the casino's logic from within. And when the casinos finally realized what was happening, when they understood how they were being beaten on their own turf, they'd already lost enough value to make any CEO sweat. The question was no longer who is winning, but rather, how is this happening right before our eyes? Because in Vegas, losing is unacceptable, and someone was proving that the house wasn't invincible. And it is precisely here that the story begins to get even deeper. Because to understand how all this was possible, you need to know the system behind this operation. An almost invisible detail that transformed ordinary playing cards into a million-dollar weapon. Because when we talk about casinos, Las Vegas, money, and power, we're not just talking about gambling. We're talking about the system, about advantage, about control, and above all, about the illusion that everything's under absolute control. And perhaps that's what's most troubling about this story. The idea that someone managed to sit at the table, look the most powerful betting system in the eye, and find an invisible flaw. A loophole that had been there all along, but no one could see. This stirs something inside us because ultimately, this story isn't just about letters or millions of dollars. It's about intelligence versus structure, strategy versus power. It's about noticing details that everyone else ignores. And I want to know from you, when you hear about this possibility of turning the tables on something that seemed unbeatable, how do you feel? Admiration? Outrage? Distrust? Do you think it was genius? Or did it cross a line? If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has resonated with you the most so far. I really do read the comments. Often it's your reflections that help me delve even deeper into future videos. Your perspective might reveal a layer I haven't yet explored. And if this story is already captivating you, if you enjoy this type of content that reveals the dark underbelly of Las Vegas, the scandals, like the sophisticated scams, the power games that happen far from the neon lights, then give it a like. It may seem like a simple thing, but it shows the platform that this type of narrative needs to reach more people. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who are also interested in these true stories about the hidden side of money and gambling. It's not just a click, it's what keeps this type of content alive. And if you're not already subscribed, maybe now's the time. Because what we're starting to uncover here goes far beyond an isolated case. Las Vegas has secrets, and each story reveals a different layer of this invisible game that happens behind the tables. If you want to continue diving into this universe, understanding how the behind-the-scenes workings, the systems, are the strategies that almost no one explains, sign up and become part of this community that likes to see beyond the obvious. Now he takes a deep breath, because what seemed like just an improbable winning streak was, in fact, the tip of a meticulously calculated mechanism. And to understand how all of this was executed with such precision, we need to get to the heart of the method, the technical detail that transforms something seemingly ordinary into a million-dollar advantage. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened there wasn't a magic trick, nor a cinematic heist full of hidden technology. It was something much simpler, and precisely for that reason, much more frightening for the casinos. The technical name for this is edge sorting in simpler terms, classification by edges. But don't be fooled by the seemingly innocuous name. The impact of this was in the millions. It all begins with an almost invisible detail. The cards used at high-stakes games, especially Baccarat, came from a respected manufacturer. New, sealed cards, theoretically perfect. But there was a small imperfection in the pattern on the back, a minimal misalignment in the design of the edges. Something so subtle that, for most people, it would go unnoticed their entire lives. But not for those who train their eye. And this is where the mindset behind the system comes in. It wasn't about manipulating cards. It wasn't about hiding anything up your sleeve. It was about observing, studying, understanding patterns, transforming an overlooked detail into a strategic advantage. During a game of Baccarat, the cards are revealed one by one. And experienced players know that certain cards, especially the highest ones, completely change the dynamics of the bets. If you know when they are coming, your decision-making ceases to be random and becomes calculated. What this group did was notice that some cards had a slightly different pattern on the back. And more than that, they convinced the casino to spin certain specific cards under the pretext of superstition. They claimed that they brought good luck if they were turned over in a certain way. At VIP tables where players bet millions, such requests are not uncommon. Casinos usually comply because keeping the customer satisfied is part of the psychological game. And there was the key. When high cards were identified, they were asked to be turned over. Low cards remained in their original position. Gradually, the deck became marked, not with ink, not with scratches, but with guidance. The next time those cards came back to the table, all you had to do was look at the back. A tiny detail on the edge revealed whether it was a high or low card. Do you realize the transformation this causes? The game, which should be based on probability, is now based on insider information. And in Las Vegas, information is power. They didn't break the rules of the game. They understood the game better than the casino. There was no system intrusion. There were no hidden electronic devices. Everything happened in front of the cameras, under the brightest possible light. To the security guards, it just looked like a superstitious gambler asking for minor adjustments. To the croupiers, it was just another night of high stakes. But behind the scenes, something different was happening. Wins began to accumulate. They weren't explosive gains followed by natural losses. They were consistent, almost surgical results. The house always seemed to be one step behind. And since Baccarat involves very high values in VIP rooms, each session represented figures that would make any investor sweat. Millions were earned. And the most impressive thing? For a long time, nobody noticed the real pattern. The reports showed an extremely lucky player, a disciplined professional, someone who knew when to raise the stakes and when to back down. Statistically improbable, but not impossible. And that margin between improbable and impossible was exactly where the system held its ground. There's something almost philosophical about all of this. The hidden truth wasn't concealed in a locked safe. It was printed on the back of the cards. What was lacking wasn't technology, it was perception. And that completely changes the narrative, because it reveals something bigger about decisions and mindset. Whoever sees it sooner decides better. While casinos relied on the overall mathematics of the game, someone was exploiting a microscopic flaw in the process. It wasn't about defying the law, it was about using the very conditions offered by the house. And this creates enormous moral tension. If the casino allows the cards to be shuffled, if the cards are produced with minor imperfections, if everything happens with the house's approval, where exactly does the cheating begin? Or does it even begin? That was the question that began to resonate when the numbers became too large to ignore. Because it's one thing for a player to win one night, it's quite another to repeat that with almost scientific precision. Behind the scenes, executives began revisiting recordings, analyzing scrambling patterns, questioning suppliers. Something didn't add up. And the more they investigated, the more they realized that the system was both simple and ingenious. It wasn't force. It wasn't traditional fraud. It was reading the game. It was strategy. It was the ability to turn detail into an advantage. And when they finally connected the dots, when they understood that their own VIP service protocol had been used against them, the impact was devastating. Not just financial, but symbolic. Because it represented something bigger. The shattering of the illusion of invincibility. Why? And it is precisely here that this story ceases to be just about letters and becomes about power, responsibility, and invisible limits. Comment below. This makes sense to me. And it was precisely at that point that the game truly changed. Because while on the surface everything seemed like just another improbable winning streak, behind the scenes the pressure began to mount. Internal reports were no longer treated as mere statistical anomalies. The word pattern began to appear with uncomfortable frequency in executive meetings. And when a casino starts using that word seriously, it means something has gone out of control. The payments began to be scrutinized very closely. Millions of dollars that were supposed to be transferred were temporarily under review. What was previously treated as legitimate profit was now framed as a possible irregularity. The atmosphere changed. Formal smiles gave way to cold stares. The same player who was once treated as a VIP client was now seen as a silent threat. And then came the decision that would mark the story. Suspension of payments. It wasn't just a financial matter, it was a stance. A clear message that the company wouldn't accept being challenged in that way. From that point on, the narrative shifted from strategy to accusation. The casinos alleged fraud. According to them, although there was no physical manipulation of the cards nor direct violation of the written rules, there was an intention to exploit a technical flaw in an unfair manner. For the players, well, I thought it was simple. The casino provided the cards, accepted the spin requests, and conducted the game normally. Nothing was hidden. Nothing was forced. But the central issue was not merely legal, it was philosophical. To what extent does strategic intelligence turn into cheating? If you use information that is available even if few people notice, is that a crime? Or is it just a demonstration of superior thinking? The case involving Phil Ivey became the ultimate symbol of this conflict. Considered by many to be one of the greatest names in professional poker, He took this discussion to court in the United Kingdom and also in the United States. It was no longer a dispute at a poker table, it was a clash between institutional power and individual skill. In British courts, the decision ultimately favored the casino. The understanding was that, yeah, although there was no traditional fraud, there was deliberate interference in the gaming process, altering the expected balance. Millions of dollars that had been won were frozen. In the United States, the outcome was also not favorable to the players. And here's the point that changes the course of the journey. Because regardless of the technical legality, his reputation was impacted. The name that was once associated with genius now carries a shadow of controversy. For some, he was a brilliant strategist who simply saw a hidden truth within the system. For others, he crossed an invisible line. This is the part that most divides opinions. Casinos argue that the game only works because there is trust in randomness. If someone finds a loophole and exploits it, even without breaking explicit rules, they would be compromising the essence of the game. On the other hand, there is the view that the house also bears responsibility. If there is a fault on the part of the provider, if adjustments are permitted, why should the player ignore this opportunity? Do you realize how this goes far beyond betting? We're talking about decisions, about ethical boundaries, about reputational impact, about how systems react when challenged. There's a silent transformation that happens when someone proves that the invincible can be vulnerable. And Vegas doesn't like vulnerability. After that incident, protocols were changed. Suppliers were reviewed, rules were adjusted, the level of surveillance in VIP lounges became even more stringent. The lesson was learned the hard way. The question continues to echo. If there were no hand-marked cards, if there was no technological intrusion, if everything happened with the authorization of the table itself, was it fraud or was intelligence applied to the maximum limit of strategy? This gray area is what makes this story so powerful, because it exposes something that many people prefer to ignore. Systems are strong until someone understands them deeply, and perhaps the biggest impact wasn't the money lost, but the symbolic shattering of the narrative of absolute control. The hidden truth came to light, and when that happens, the reaction is usually intense. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened after that legal battle wasn't just a dispute settled in court. There were silent changes, strategic adjustments, and decisions made behind the scenes that reveal a great deal about how power truly works when challenged. Write this down. Invisible boundaries. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what almost no one realizes is that after that episode, Las Vegas didn't just react, it transformed. And that transformation happened away from the spotlight, behind the scenes where strategic decisions are made without official announcements, without press conferences, without sensational headlines. The letter suppliers were changed. The models have been revised. Graphic standards underwent technical audits that went far beyond what the public imagines. What was once considered an irrelevant detail became an absolute priority. Because when millions are impacted by a microscopic flaw, the message is clear. Never again. But it didn't stop there. Security protocols have become more stringent. And when I say more stringent, I'm not just talking about more cameras. I'm talking about behavioral analysis, data cross-referencing, betting history, and real-time pattern recognition. Technology has evolved. Surveillance has become quieter and smarter. VIPs began to be monitored in a different way. And that's interesting, because high-level players have always been treated with deference. Exclusive rooms, high limits, freedom from minor demands. But after this case, every request began to be analyzed from a different perspective. That innocent superstition? Perhaps it's not so innocent after all. That request to spin cards? It may have a strategic intention behind it. The environment has changed. And there's something almost symbolic in all of this, because, deep down, this story revealed a hidden truth. The house also plays a role. There's a popular narrative that casinos are merely stages where gamblers try to beat their luck. But that's superficial. Casinos employ advanced psychological strategies. Lighting designed to alter the perception of time. Sounds carefully calibrated to stimulate emotion. Layouts designed to prolong lingering. Drinks offered strategically. Nothing there is random. It's behavioral engineering. It's a mindset applied to the environment, as it's control disguised as entertainment. And when someone manages to use the system itself against them, the reaction isn't just legal, it's structural. It's almost an instinctive defense of territory. The impact of this case wasn't just financial, it was reputational, it was strategic. It was a shattering of the narrative of invulnerability. And when that happens in a place built on the promise of absolute control, the response is forceful, because power doesn't like to be challenged. And here's something few people admit. Most people believe they're gambling against luck, but in reality, they're gambling against systems designed to influence decisions. Every move, every hesitation, every bet raise is studied through the lens of probability and psychology. This is the real journey behind the neon lights. Money is the surface. Control is the essence. When the edge sorting system exposed a flaw, it didn't just reveal a technical vulnerability. It showed that even gigantic structures can be destabilized by someone who observes better, thinks differently, and makes decisions based on information. And that creates discomfort. Because if a microscopic detail can alter the balance of millions, how many other invisible layers exist there? How many silent strategies continue to operate without the public noticing? Vegas learned, adjusted, became stronger. But he also made it clear indirectly that the game is much more complex than it seems. In Las Vegas, the game is never just about cards, it's about information. Regarding who gets access first, regarding who interprets it better, regarding those who understand the written rules and the unwritten ones. And when you start to see things through that lens, the city ceases to be just a tourist destination and becomes a laboratory of power, money, and silent manipulation. An ecosystem where every detail has a purpose and every decision has consequences. And that's precisely where this story connects to something bigger than just gambling. She talks about systems that seem unshakable, regarding institutions that project control, on the fine line between strategy and transgression. This is about what happens when someone decides to question the structure, not with brute force, but with intelligence. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's still a layer that almost no one discusses. What all this teaches us about mindset, about reading the situation, and about how power structures react when they are exposed. Write this down. Information is power. If you've made it this far, it's because this story has touched something deep inside you. Perhaps it was the shattering of the illusion. Perhaps it was the strategic aspect. Perhaps it was realizing that mind behind the lights of Las Vegas, there's a much bigger game going on. A game of information, mindset, and silent decisions. And that's exactly the kind of conversation I like to bring here. If this content provided you with value, opened a new perspective, or made you see the behind the scenes aspects in a different way, consider subscribing to the channel. The idea here is to continue exploring these true stories from the hidden side of power, money, and gambling, always going beyond the surface. And so I know you really made it to the end of this journey, right here in the comments. I'm with you until the end. It's a simple way to show that this message resonated with you, and I like to acknowledge those who follow along until the very end. If this narrative captivated you, please leave a like, not as an obligation, but as a sign of the connection we built throughout the video. This helps keep this type of content alive and reaching more people who also want to see beyond the obvious. And there's a video right here that perfectly complements this topic. It delves even deeper into the behind-the-scenes dynamics, strategy, and decisions that change everything. Click and continue watching it there. The journey doesn't end here. It's only getting more interesting.